Today, we're covering the topic of black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. This topic is especially relevant not just because it's Black History Month, but because for the first time ever, we have two black quarterbacks starting for both the AFC and NFC in Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes. Most folks can appreciate the historical significance of this moment, but plenty of others have flocked to the internet to complain about us bringing race into sports and saying silly things like, who cares what color these quarterbacks are as long as they're good enough to do the job? This line of thinking is incredibly dismissive to the struggles that black quarterbacks have faced over the years and still face to this day. The reason this is such a big deal is because of how hard the road was for these men to get here. For decades, decision makers in football have contended that black players should be excluded from playing quarterback at the pro level because of the belief that white players would not follow their leadership and the misguided perception that black quarterbacks lack the mental and personality traits to succeed. Promising black quarterbacks at the high school and college levels were often transitioned at the pro level to other positions such as running back or wide receiver. The NFL was founded in the 1920s, but it wasn't until 1968 that a black quarterback started a game for an NFL team. Marlin Briscoe was drafted in the 14th round by the Broncos after a stellar career at the University of Nebraska-Omaha, but they wanted to convert him to cornerback. He negotiated with the team and they gave him a shot at playing quarterback, and after a couple injuries, he got a shot and became the first black starting QB in October of 1968. Briscoe only played the position for 1 year before being traded to Buffalo, where he was converted to wide receiver. He would go on to have a great career with 2 Super Bowl rings as a receiver, but despite setting multiple Broncos rookie records as a QB, he didn't get a fair shot at the position. This trend would continue for decades as more and more promising young QBs were denied the chance to play the position at the pro level. While a ban on black players in the NFL officially ended in 1946, the quarterback position was among the last to be desegregated. It wasn't until 2017, when the New York Giants started Geno Smith in place of Eli Manning in his final year with the team, that all 32 active NFL teams had started at least one black quarterback. That year, nearly 70% of NFL players, but only 25% of starting quarterbacks, were black. Now, the two teams in the Super Bowl, the Philadelphia Eagles and Kansas City Chiefs, have vastly different records of starting black quarterbacks, as the Eagles had George Taliaferro in the pre-Super Bowl era, and their first black quarterback in the Super Bowl era was Randall Cunningham in 1985. The Eagles have had 11 black starters over the course of their history, including guys like Rodney Peete, Donovan McNabb, Michael Vick, and most recently, Jalen Hurts. The Chiefs, one of the older franchises in the AFL and NFL, waited all the way until the year 2000 when they started Warren Moon as their first black starting quarterback and have had just 3 since their inception in 1960, including Patrick Mahomes. In the pre-Super Bowl era, there were a few black quarterbacks that got a chance to start for teams with cool names like the Milwaukee Badgers, Akron Pros, New York Yanks, and some familiar names like the Chicago Bears, Philadelphia Eagles, and Green Bay Packers. Some names are well known, like Fritz Pollard in the 1920s, and others, like the aforementioned George Taliaferro and Willie Thrower, were in the 1950s. Willie Thrower, great name for a quarterback, by the way. They were both less heralded, perhaps, than Pollard, but were still trailblazers in their own way. In the Super Bowl era, we've had plenty of black starting quarterbacks in the NFL, but only 24 have been lucky enough to start a playoff game for their teams. In 1974, James Harris became the first black quarterback to start and win an NFL playoff game, and he did so with the LA Rams. 2 years later, in the 1976 season, Harris was still the starter, but was benched by Rams owner Carroll Rosenblum, who explained his decision by telling the press, quote, "Unfortunately, the quarterback position is controversial enough without adding the color element," end quote. Harris is also notable for being the first black QB to enter a season as a team starter because he and the aforementioned Marlin Briscoe both won their jobs after the season had begun. Warren Moon is another notable historical figure in this context. He made 7 playoff appearances in the NFL and was the first black quarterback elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. During his NFL career, which lasted from 1984 to 2000, he was the first black quarterback for 4 different teams. Despite a great college career with the Washington Huskies, Moon had to prove himself in the CFL, winning 5 Grey Cups, Canada's version of the Super Bowl, before getting a true shot in the NFL. He played 17 years in the league, and his name is firmly etched in the record books, but he could have had an even more impressive career if he didn't have to wait until he was 28 to play in the NFL. In the long history of the NFL, we've had only 4 black quarterbacks voted as league MVP, and 3 of them were in the last 10 years. Steve McNair was the first in 2003, but even he had to share the honor with Peyton Manning. In the last 10 years, we've had Cam Newton in 2015, Patrick Mahomes in 2018, Lamar Jackson in 2019, and likely either Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts in 2022. Another reason why the fact that we have 2 black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl is notable is because of how rare an occurrence it is to have even one black quarterback in the Super Bowl. In the 57 years of Super Bowl games, with 114 potential starting quarterbacks, if my math is right, only 8 have been black if you include this Sunday's game. We had to wait until Super Bowl 22 in 1988 for a black quarterback to start, and that was Doug Williams of the then Washington Redskins, who would also go on to win the game and be named Super Bowl MVP. We had to wait another 12 years after that for Steve McNair to make it with the Tennessee Titans in 2000, and since then it's become a more regular occurrence with guys like Donovan McNabb, Colin Kaepernick, Cam Newton, Russell Wilson twice, Patrick Mahomes 3 times, and now Jalen Hurts as well. We can see this becoming a more regular occurrence now that we're seeing many of the barriers being lifted, but there are still preconceived notions and biases that we need to fight against in our continued fight for equality. Think about Lamar Jackson. When he was coming up in the draft, he was one of the best players in college football and one of the best quarterbacks, but an NFL or former NFL executive still went on national TV on ESPN and suggested that he should transition to wide receiver. I think things have gone pretty well for Lamar Jackson as a quarterback in the NFL since he's gone on to be named league MVP in 2019. So the point of all this is not to suggest that we should have black quarterbacks just for the sake of filling a quota, but rather to celebrate the achievements of those who have broken down the barriers and walls placed in front of them. There will come a time where it won't be notable that a black quarterback is starting in the Super Bowl, but considering this is the first time in the nearly 60-year history of the game that we have 2, it's absolutely something that should be celebrated and appreciated. So let's enjoy the Super Bowl. So when Sunday rolls around and you turn on the TV to watch Super Bowl 57, regardless of who wins, we hope it's going to be a great game. But remember that we are witnessing history, and hopefully it will be the first of many times that we see 2 black quarterbacks shining on the biggest stage. That's it for our show today. Thank you all for rocking with us, and we hope you learned something today about the history of black quarterbacks in the NFL. Please make sure to subscribe to our podcast on all the major platforms and leave us a review while you're at it. You can find us on social media on Instagram and Twitter at 4040VisionPod, and we really appreciate you guys giving us your valuable time. Peace out, y'all.